各位，现在下面呢，我们是一个学习科学全球网络的一个演讲。我们有3位来自美国不同地方的讲者。下面我们用英文。In the following, we'll conduct the session in English, and we have 3 distinguished guests from the Global Science of Learning Education Network, Bob, Andrea, and Winsome. Could I ask them to briefly introduce themselves? Bob?
Thank you very much, Kai-ming. And incidentally, thank you as well. You have been instrumental from the very first meeting of the Global Science of Learning Education Network over 2 years ago. And so thank you for this opportunity. I'm Bob Wise. I'm one of the co-founders and the present coordinator of the Global Science of Learning Education Network. Prior to this, I was the leader of a national education advocacy nonprofit in the United States. I also served as governor of the state of West Virginia and in the United States Congress for 9 terms.
Thank you. Andrea?
Hi, thank you so much, Kai-ming, and thank you for the invitation, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Andrea Chiba, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Global Science of Learning Network. I'm also a science director of the Temporal Dynamics of Learning Center at UC San Diego, and where I'm a professor of cognitive science and neuroscience.
Thank you. Winsome?
Yes, hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. I am Winsome Waite. I am a longtime practitioner in K-12. I am a senior advisor to the Global Science of Learning Education Network, and I'm also a senior education fellow here in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Could I ask Bob also to say something about the global network? Well, why is it there, and what are your general missions?
The general purpose, Kai-ming, of the Global Science of Learning Education Network is that to focus on engaging all sectors that are key to worldwide science of learning implementation. We believe this is such a critical time. And those key sectors are the research community, education and practitioners, philanthropists, and policymakers, all coming together to develop and share strategies that will be successful across many different cultures. This becomes particularly critical because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which for the first time, we're now all in the same situation across the world. Thus, we can share with each other on a much more shared experience basis.
Oh, thank you very much for that. And I've been in various places, including China, Taiwan, or whatever. And I understand that science of learning has different interpretations, different parts of the world. So I don't think we want to monopolize anything, but what do you think is a more appropriate definition for science of learning, so that everybody is talking on the same wavelengths? Andrea, would you like to address that?
When the U.S. National Science Foundation originally conceived of science of learning, they conceived of a broad multidisciplinary science that focuses on learning in a very deep way, establishing a very basic science. So this can mean traditional psychology, education, cognitive science, but also computer science, engineering, biological sciences, physiology, really trying to understand every aspect of learning. So this incorporates in the US even things like artificial learning, but mostly what they wanted was for the disciplines to gather around and take education seriously, take education very seriously, such that everyone in the world who does science would think of it as an important enough thing to focus their efforts on. And so that was really the conception from the outset. And so what we've been going for is sort of inclusivity of the various networks that conceive of science of learning in different ways so that we can elevate everyone's work.
Thank you so much. Anything to add to this?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the science of learning is an important body of work that is actually aligned to many other initiatives, at least right here in the United States. We have initiatives around the whole child, they call it whole child learning. We have the social emotional learning. We have social emotional academic development. and a host of other related initiatives. But it's important to note that the science of learning and those principles are really embedded in all of those initiatives.
And one analogy that I often like to give, it misses the mark a little, but I think it's still useful to think about. And that is the idea of building a very basic science of learning. So if you think of biomedicine, most of medicine is based on a foundation of deep biological knowledge. No one would ever think of just testing pill A that may be good against pill B. It's based on what it does to the biology of the system, what side effects it may have, et cetera. And so we would like education to be based on an equally deep science and then scaffolded up to know that we're going to get high variability in terms of what's generalizable, but to really found it in a basic platform of science of learning.
Oh, yes, I tend to agree, because I think that we have philosophy of education, psychology of education, sociology of education, but in the broader sense, you may say all these are borrowed from the mainstream science disciplines. And science of learning is always concentrating on learning with all kinds of human wisdom. I would say this is the basic science for education.
Yeah, and I think one of the important issues is that we all are developing in different cultures, and we can learn across the different cultures what that means, and we can see what principles hold across cultures, what are different, and really, we like to say what works for whom, where, and when.
And nowadays, nothing is more cross-cultural than the pandemic.
No, that is certainly correct. And if you look at the fact that in March of this year, we had 1.5 billion students jerked out of their, taken out of their schools, 66 million teachers across the world, over 160 nations affected similarly. And as Andrea Schleicher has pointed out in some presentations he's made to the global science of learning, this, for the very first time, the entire world was a common laboratory, because we were all facing the same situation. Now, each of us was facing it in a different context and in a different culture, but for the first time, we were able to learn from each other. And that's continuing, Kai-ming, because as we're now unfortunately entering a third phase in many countries, but we have many nations that have approached returning to school or how they're restructuring school in different ways. And so it's a unique opportunity to learn from one another. And that's, I think, one of the unique aspects of the Global Science of Learning Network, is that we are truly trying to bring people together to address common problems, particularly that are COVID related, that can then lead to other school transformation.
So is there any initial kind of findings or approaches or whatever vis-a-vis the pandemic?
I just want to point out one of the challenges that I think might be worldwide, but certainly here in the United States, is the large number of students, especially the teenagers, that are really not attending, that are not checking in online, that for some considered to be lost. And so that's one of the areas I think looking ahead, how do we ensure that going forward, we can really identify, locate, and serve all of our students when there's a pandemic or any acts of nature.
Yeah.
We were not really ready, and I think we've done a really good job being able to reach out. And one of the learnings I think we've really seen happening is that close connection between school, community, and families now, because we now recognize the importance of us working together. So that's a plus, but I do think those students who are lost, especially again, middle and high school students, is of great concern.
I would like to add something to that too, that I think is interesting. And that is that we will be able to learn across the countries also, because there are countries actually where the children simply aren't going to school right now. It's just not feasible. There are not online resources, and they've had to basically cancel school for a little while. And so everybody's had to deal with the situation as best suits the region. And I think that there'll be very interesting findings you know, and we can help everyone try to figure out how to regroup also.
Kai-ming, the global network is about sharing information. It's also about identifying problems that people want to work on together across the world. And so we have over 400 active participants across the globe, and it's growing all the time. And we welcome anyone who's participating in this event to contact us and get involved. But the advisory group and the 400 members identified 4 key areas that they wanted to form working groups around. And 2 of them involve distance learning, the social emotional aspects of it, how parents and others are faring with it. Another one, and Winsome is heading this up and is already up and running, and that is an active teacher support network. What is it that teachers need to know from the science of learning? How can the science of learning support teacher preparation and teacher development? So these are actively up and running or getting ready to be up and running, and we welcome any kind of participation. And then within those groups, the participants identify the particular topics they want to work on. So it's self-generated within the network.
And that's why we're really a network of networks. We keep branching off into subtopics and really getting smaller groups to work together as small networks, and then feeding information back up to the larger network, which then feeds information out to all of the other big networks internationally. But the Teacher Support Network is really an exciting endeavor that has started. It's been amazing to see the energy that the people who are working in this network have around pre-service, in-service, and the focus really has been so much more about well-being, teacher well-being, you know, what we really need to do to ensure that, you know, our teachers are prepared and supported to keep themselves well, but also to be able to lead the well-being of their students. So lots of exciting things going on in that particular small group network.
Yeah,
I suppose this network will serve the globe even after the pandemic.
This bigger network. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, we're all excited about that. Yes, because the pandemic is has brought us together in many ways around common crisis and common challenges. But I haven't run into too many that want school to go back to the way it was. They wanted to change things before the pandemic. Now we have the science of learning and so many findings that have come forward in just the past decade, and the opportunity to truly embed that into these new systems that will be created. And so I come from a rural area in state of West Virginia, and we have a saying that when the ox is in the ditch, everyone jumps in to help push it out. And so the world ox in education is in the ditch. And so this is an excellent opportunity for all of us to be working together to make sure that when we do push it out, we make sure that the science of learning is uppermost in the decisions that are made by our politicians, by our policymakers, by our education leaders, our school leaders, all those that are being involved in this.
Oh, thank you. Andreas, you want to say something?
Oh, no, actually, Bob touched on those points for the most part. I just wanted to add in that one thing that networks are good at is actually teaching each other too. And so the interesting opportunity for the policymakers, scientists, researchers, and philanthropists, anyone who wants to be involved actually, is that it is one of those efforts where we co-educate. And so often once you get to a certain level, you just sort of decide to convey information about what should be done. But here we need to educate each other, because this is a process where you really need to bring together the science with the educators and the policy in interesting ways. And it's a learning process. So it's really a learning community at multiple levels of the network, actually.
Thank you. Yeah.
I just want to say, I envision us at some point including our students and our young people too. One of the things we've learned in this pandemic is that they do have a voice, that they have a strong voice, that they're great advocates for themselves, that they're leaders and they're leading change. And so getting them connected to this body of work, the science of learning, and can really promote their work and help them to be strong strong and empowered young people to lead policy changes in the future.
Yes, and I think we're seeing the power of the young people right now also. I mean, they are really beginning to find their voices with respect to things like climate change. And so our hope is that they'll begin to find their voices in their education with their own educations also. So
what Winsome just said was it's very inspiring. I always think that students should be active learners, but you are saying that they should sometimes lead the direction of learning. Right?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And just having been in many conversations in recent times where young people are on the panels, you know, middle and high school students, some of those students who were, you know, disconnected for a while, maybe came back. They do have their own unique voice and experiences that many times adults, policymakers, researchers, and educators just don't have. And I do think within this moment, they are actually being encouraged and finding their voice. And what they're doing is actually telling us as adults the things that work for them. And how often do we as policymakers ask our young people, what actually works for you? And so I think it's a moment when we can really engage them. And certainly that's a way to engage them in academic learning and keep them in school.
So Kai-ming, you just referenced active learners, and I've heard you speak of this before. So I was talking to a high school teacher in Chicago, and I was saying that I was sorry it looked like this was going to be a lost year. And she corrected me very quickly to say, no, they're just learning a lot differently. Make no mistake about it. These students are learning. They may not be sitting in a classroom in the way that they were before, but they're still learning. And indeed, the science of learning shows us the many ways that someone can learn. And so I think that as tough and hard as these moments are, we will be learning, and we'll be learning from our students about the effective ways of teaching and learning.
yeah,
I think
I was going to ask you, Kai-ming, go. I'm sorry.
I was thinking that the students may not have the opportunity to think like this if not because of the pandemic. It's a blessing in disguise in a way.
Yeah, we were talking about you today and your explanation about what education is versus learning. So it would be a nice time to talk about that. I think the idea that Bob brought up, that learning or students are learning all the time, is very different from what schools do to educate. And to recognize that learning is happening all the time. It's a natural quest, if you will.
Yes, to quote Kai-ming, actually,
Yes.
one of the things he always says, and he's sitting right here, is that learning is an instinct and education is not. And for me, that resonated so strongly, because if you think about the biological system and a social system and in a culture, you're always learning. That's what the brain and the body do, you learn. And, but we've constructed the rest. Education is a constructed reality. Learning is something we do naturally. And so we can reconstruct it so that learning continues to be the instinct that carries you through education. Sometimes the two are not well matched. There was an interesting book that's relevant to this conversation by a woman, Kathleen Cushman, who wrote a series of books using the children's voices to construct the books. And one of the titles was Fires in the Middle School Bathroom. And the question is, why was it more interesting to start fires in the bathroom than to attend to your lessons? And the students had all sorts of interesting answers, and constructing things in a way where we balance the knowledge and the life skills and the interest with instinctive learning is going to be a big challenge, actually. But I think a well worth it challenge.
Yes. And I just read, I got a book which is yet to be published by OECD. They have 4 scenarios for schooling. And the first one is, as usual, extend and expand. The second is schools as a hub of learning. The third is education outsourced. And the fourth one learn as you go, just like eating. You can go anywhere and you learn. Of course, this is a kind of a little bit fancy, but I think there are indications of emergence of that because of technology, because of the change of people's minds, and so on and so forth. So I think the network has a long journey ahead. It's a very noble mission, but it is also a very important to human beings.
We think it came along at just the important moment. You pointed out the pandemic. Nobody wished for this, but it's here. And so now, as we shape to transform our education systems, what I've learned from natural disasters, I spent 24 years in public life, and much of it was spent dealing with natural disasters. The difference is this one keeps coming, as opposed to a flood, a tsunami, a hurricane. And so, but what it does is we do triage, and part of the world is still doing education triage. We try to transition out of the triage, but the key thing, Kai-ming, the key issue is then how do we get to transformation? How do we come out better than we were before? And so that's why the global science of learning, we seek to make sure that established science of learning is established in the key decisions that educators, policymakers, philanthropists, governments, NGOs, and others will be making. And that's why we also thank you for the opportunity to be here, but also encourage anyone who wants to be involved, please contact Global Science of Learning Education Network, our website, our various video conferences. The more we can all become involved, the more we share, the quicker we're going to be able to improve the lot of millions of students across the globe.
Oh, thank you very much for this very valuable message. I'm afraid the time is almost up. And thank you very much. Unless Winsome and Andrea do have other some last things to say.
I have one last comment, and that's with respect to the pandemic and all the events in the world and people's perspectives on learning in general. And that is the one thing that really changes what we learn in not necessarily the best way is actually fear. So the best thing we can try to do is look at the future of learning with hope, actually. And so I just wanted to end on that note for myself, and thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And just one last point from me being the practitioner here, I think one of the questions that have arisen over and over in this pandemic is, what is it that's essential in what our curriculum, in what we teach our students? What is it that we need to ensure that they learn and they are able to do? And I think this time, this experience is causing us to really question what we've been doing. It's questioning our standards, it's questioning our curriculum, it's questioning our pacing guides, it's questioning our assessments. And I do think that is one of the key changes that I imagine will occur, that we're gonna go more to a master-based approach where we really identify what it is we want our children to learn academically, and certainly in a whole child way. And then we'll really be able to spend more time going deeply rather than such a broad way, at least in the United States. And it's been great to be part of this discussion with everyone.
Oh, thank you very much, because what you said is a very rich echo to the theme of this meeting, this conference. But you also are confirming us that this is not only about China, Hong Kong, and other Chinese communities, is global. But thank you very much for this this session, and hope to see you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.